The Magnolia Plantation is situated on nearly 400 acres in South Carolina. It serves as a painful reminder of the unceasing brutality of slavery. Today, the plantation encourages visitors with the hope of gaining a stronger connection to our past. An experienced reporter, Curtis Bunn, described as, quote, no controlling the endless thoughts of the horrors experienced by the captive Africans. To talk more about that experience is Curtis Bunn, a reporter for NBC BLK. So, Curtis, thanks so much for being here. You mentioned in the article that some of your friends, that they would not go on a trip like this. Tell me a bit about what motivated you to take on this experience, is to sleep where your enslaved ancestors once slept.
Yeah, well, it was great to be here with you, Ms. Alcindor. As a journalist of a long time now, pretty much everything I encounter or see in my life, I'm always thinking in terms of a potential story. And I was researching a book that came out in 2021 that I wrote with 4 other journalists called Say Their Names, How Black Lives Came to Matter in America. And during that research, I learned about what's happening with the Slave Dwelling Project in Charleston by Joe McGill. And I learned later that not only could you visit the plantation, but you could actually spend the night there. And as someone who is always interested in a little bit of adventure, and certainly have a close connection to my heritage and wanted a stronger connection to my ancestors, I thought it would be a good idea to make that trip. And it was quite an experience, to say the least.
And you say it was quite an experience. Tell us a bit more about what it was like spending time at this plantation, and in particular, what it was like interacting with the white visitors who also you wrote about in your article.
Yes, it's really not just going there and sleeping overnight, but they set up a fireside chat where blacks and whites come together. In the case of my experience, there were 22 of us evenly split, and we talked about race for an hour, race in the country. And the white participants were there because they said they wanted to be a part of the solution to a growing problem of marginalization of black people in America. And the black people there were certainly listening, but also pretty tired about the things that continue to happen in America. And so with that as a backdrop, you then went in at around 9 o'clock, we went into the cabins. And my wife and I went. We certainly were ill prepared for what we were about to experience. I don't know what I was thinking, but the images that I'm seeing right here are far more luxurious than what we experienced. There was no electricity, there were no beds, there was no running water. And as the night grew older, it got colder. And so it was a very moving experience, harrowing. We were sad, we were angry, and of course, around 4 a.m., the part that made the trip worthwhile, but also the scariest, was we heard off in the distance toward the cemetery back there, a woman screaming. And I had finally nodded off. My wife woke me up and said, "Do you hear this?" And we had gone to the mountains in North Georgia for a weekend, and we heard strange animals that were distinctly animals. This was a human woman's voice screaming. And it was very difficult to process in that moment. Later, I felt a stronger connection. I think they were trying to communicate with us, because there was a white couple in the cabin next to us, and my wife asked them in the morning, "Did you hear that screaming around 4 o'clock?" And they said, "We didn't go to sleep all night and we didn't hear anything." So I think that was confirmation. And I'm not a metaphysical kind of person, but something happened there in that experience that made it worthwhile, even though in that moment it was quite eerie.
I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just listening to you talk about this. Now, you talk about the range of emotions that you felt from sad to connecting with your ancestors. How have you been able to process this experience since?
It's something that I carry with me every day. I was talking to my son earlier this evening, and he brought it back up. And, I think that I left there feeling much more connected to myself. In 2007, I went to Ghana. I went to Cape Coast, where Africans were held prior to being loaded on the ships and through the Middle Passage and to islands and other places, and then to America. That was another heartbreaking experience. This one was a little bit different because it was 10 hours. In Cape Coast, you walk through the quote-unquote slave dungeons, and it's a 20, 30-minute process. It's very, very difficult to imagine, and it's very hard to take that our ancestors had to go through that. But but it's over in 20 or 30 minutes, and you leave there shaken, certainly, but this was a 10-hour experience where we had a chance to sit there and process it and talk about it. And then those screams in the night is something that you just don't forget. And I certainly do feel a closer connection to who I am as an African American and an African and my ancestors. And I understand the strength that we have as Black people more, because the conditions that they had to endure can only be done by people of strength.
Well, this was, I mean, it's so moving to hear you talk about this. The article was so moving, so I hope people can go on NBCnews.com and read it. So thank you so much, Curtis Bunn of NBC BLK.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.